I stood under the bright white lights of the Whitney Museum, my reflection caught in the polished floor like a ghost. All around me, people murmured softly, glasses of champagne in hand, pausing in front of my paintings as if they were sacred. Flashbulbs popped. Somewhere, a jazz trio played faintly in the background. I smoothed the silk of my midnight blue dress and smiled politely at a curator who whispered congratulations as she passed. On the surface, I looked calm, composed, the very picture of a successful artist on the night of her first major solo exhibition. Inside, though, my chest thudded with a mix of disbelief and something darker, something I hadn't felt in years. My phone buzzed in my clutch. I glanced down, expecting another text from my gallery manager. Instead, it was a name I hadn't seen in years. Eleanor Parker. My mother. For a moment, the museum blurred. The scent of fresh oil paint and champagne turned sharp, metallic. I hadn't spoken to her since the night she told me I was wasting my life. And now, of all nights, she was here. I looked toward the entrance just as she walked in. The years had added silver to her hair, but her posture was the same, rigid, judgmental. My heart slammed once, hard, against my ribs. Tonight, she would see everything. I was 20 when the fight happened, standing in the kitchen of our small Ohio house, clutching my sketchbook like it was a shield. "You can't keep doing this, Lila," my mother had said, her hands on her hips, her voice sharp enough to cut. "You're 20 years old with no degree, no job, no future. Painting isn't a career. It's a hobby. Grow up." I had swallowed hard, my throat burning. "Mom, I sold 2 pieces last week. Someone paid actual money for them." She had snorted. 2 pieces? For what? $50? That's not a life. That's you playing pretend while everyone else moves on. My father didn't even look up from his newspaper. The silence from his end of the table hurt worse than her words. I could feel my fingers trembling against the sketchbook's edge, leaving smudges of charcoal where I gripped too tightly. "Why can't you just be proud of me?" I whispered. "Because there's nothing to be proud of," she snapped. That was it. The moment that split me open. I had packed my suitcase that night, shoving paint tubes and brushes into a duffel bag, my sketchbook on top like a promise. My grandmother, the only person who ever believed in me, found me in the driveway as I loaded the car. She pressed something into my palm, a thin, worn paintbrush with a handle smooth from years of use. "This was mine," she said softly. "When you hold it, remember who you are. Don't let anyone silence you." Her words were the only thing that kept me from turning back. I drove through the night to Chicago, tears blurring the highway lights, my whole life stuffed into the back seat. By sunrise, I had found a cheap studio apartment with peeling wallpaper and a rent I could barely afford. The first night, I slept on the floor, my sketchbook under my head like a pillow. It wasn't much, but it was mine. And I swore, with that paintbrush clutched in my hand, that one day they would see me, not as a failure, but as an artist. Chicago was colder than I expected, and so was the reality of starting over. My apartment was barely big enough to fit an easel, a mattress, and the little second-hand desk I dragged in from the curb. Every corner smelled faintly of old dust and turpentine, but to me, it smelled like freedom. I worked 3 jobs, waitressing during the day, cleaning offices late at night, and doing commission portraits for whoever could pay. Most nights, I came home so exhausted I could barely stand, but I'd still sit on the floor and paint until my fingers cramped. My landlord hated the smell of oil paint, so I kept the windows cracked even in February, shivering under layers of sweaters while I worked. There were days I questioned everything. I'd stare at a blank canvas until dawn, tears streaking my cheeks, wondering if Mom had been right, if I was wasting my life. But then I'd pick up my grandmother's brush, worn smooth from her hand, and something inside me would steady. It was at a tiny neighborhood gallery that someone finally noticed me. Her name was Clara Jennings, an art dealer with silver-streaked hair and a knack for finding raw talent. She stopped in one night while I was hanging pieces for a community show and stared at my painting of a young woman standing barefoot in the snow. "You have something," she said simply. Come by my gallery tomorrow. That single sentence cracked my world open. Clara became more than a dealer, she became my mentor. She taught me about pricing my work, networking with collectors, and, most importantly, believing that my art was worth something. The first time a painting sold for more than I made in a month at the diner, I nearly cried. The buyer, a quiet man in a wool coat, shook my hand and told me my work made him feel less alone. That was the moment I knew I wasn't crazy for doing this. I started building a name quietly, local shows, art fairs, small features in online magazines. I didn't tell my family. I posted vague updates on social media, just enough so no one would think I'd fallen apart, but never enough for them to know how far I was going. Years passed like this, slowly, steadily, my life filling with color. Commissions turned into gallery representation. Gallery representation turned into national shows. National shows turned into international ones. And then, one morning, Clara called me with a voice shaking with excitement. "They want you," she said. "The Whitney Solo Exhibition. Lila, this is it." I hung up the phone and sat on the floor, clutching my grandmother's paintbrush to my chest. For the first time, I let myself picture it, my work hanging on the same walls that once held the greats. I didn't know if my parents would ever see it, but I knew the world would. The air in the museum felt heavier as my mother crossed the threshold. I could see her scanning the room, her eyes darting from canvas to canvas as if trying to piece together what exactly she had walked into. "Lila." Her voice was quieter than I remembered, almost hesitant. I nodded, not trusting my own voice yet. "Hi, Mom." Before she could say more, a curator stepped up to me, smiling. "Miss Parker, the director would like to toast you before the press arrives." Miss Parker. I saw my mother's head turn sharply at the title, as if hearing my name spoken that way shifted something inside her. "Go ahead," I said to the curator. "I'll be right there." The room buzzed around us, guests pausing in front of my work, reading the little plaques bearing my name. My name. I watched Mom take a few hesitant steps toward the largest piece in the exhibit, a massive canvas of a girl with charcoal-stained hands and a defiant gaze. Her lips parted. "This is yours." "All of it," I said softly. She turned slowly, taking in the room, the spotlights, the murmuring critics, the champagne glasses clinking. There was no mistaking it now. This wasn't a student show, or some community art fair. This was the Whitney. "You did this," she said finally. "I did." My voice didn't shake this time. "While you thought I was throwing my life away, I was building this." Her face flushed, a mix of shame and something that looked almost like awe. "I didn't know." "No, you didn't want to know," I said gently but firmly. "You never asked. You just assumed I'd fail. And for years I let that hurt me. But now," I gestured around the room, "now I'm not hiding anymore." Behind her, my father appeared, slower, grayer, holding his hat in his hands like he wasn't sure what to do with himself. His gaze swept the walls, lingering on one particular painting, a quiet portrait of a man sitting at a kitchen table with a newspaper, his face obscured. He swallowed hard. "That's me," he said quietly. "It was," I replied. "Back when you never looked up." Silence stretched between us, thick and complicated. For the first time in years, I didn't fill it. I just let them stand there, surrounded by everything they said I could never be. A reporter approached and asked for a quote. I smiled for the cameras, my mother still frozen beside me, and said clearly, "This show is called Unseen No More because every piece here was once ignored, just like the girl who painted them." The cameras clicked. My parents flinched. And I felt something inside me settle, not anger, not revenge, but something cleaner. Justice, maybe. When the toast came, I raised my glass high. To everyone who said no, I said to the room, my eyes on my parents, "Thank you. You made me fight harder." The room erupted in applause. My mother's hands trembled around her champagne flute. My father looked down at his shoes. And for the first time, I felt taller than both of them. After the toast, the crowd slowly dispersed, giving me a moment alone with my parents. They stood stiffly near one of my smaller canvases, a self-portrait I painted during my loneliest Chicago winter, when my heater barely worked and I slept wrapped in 2 coats. My mother finally spoke. "Lila, we were wrong." Her voice cracked on the last word. I was wrong. I crossed my arms, not in anger, but to hold myself steady. Do you know how many nights I painted until sunrise because I was terrified you might be right about me? That I really was wasting my life? I do now. She reached out, but I didn't move closer. "I'm not angry anymore," I said carefully, surprising even myself. "But if you want to be part of my life again, there are conditions." She blinked. "Conditions?" "Yes." I let my voice stay even, not cold, not cruel, just clear. "First, you stop dismissing people for choosing a different path. When my niece says she wants to sing, you don't tell her to get serious. When my cousin says he wants to be a writer, you don't roll your eyes. You support them." My father nodded slowly, his jaw tight. "Second," I continued, "you acknowledge that what I do matters. You don't have to love every painting, but you don't get to call it a hobby ever again." My mother swallowed hard. "I can do that." "And third," I said, my tone softening, "you come to at least one show every year. Not because you have to, because you want to see me, because you want to understand me." There was a long pause. My father cleared his throat. "That seems fair." I nodded. "Good. Because I'm not going back to being the daughter you pretend not to brag about." My mother actually smiled a little then, bittersweet and teary-eyed. "I never stopped bragging, Lila. I just never knew what to brag about." I let out a slow breath I'd been holding for years. "Then start now." I gestured toward the largest painting in a room, the centerpiece of the exhibit, the one of the barefoot girl in the snow. "That's who I was. That's the girl you almost broke. But she's standing here tonight because she refused to stay broken." For a moment, the 3 of us stood there in silence, looking at the painting together. It felt like the first honest moment we'd shared in years. The museum began to empty as the night wore on, leaving only a few stragglers lingering by the bar. My parents stayed close, quieter now, almost reverent as they moved from piece to piece. At the very end of the exhibit hung a small, almost hidden canvas, my favorite. It wasn't for sale. It never would be. It was a still life of a single paintbrush lying across a wooden table, its bristles frayed, its handle worn smooth. My mother stopped in front of it and tilted her head. "This one feels different," she said softly. "It is," I said, stepping closer. "It's the first thing I ever painted after leaving home. That's Grandma's brush. She gave it to me the night I left." My father's face softened, a deep regret flickering there. "Your grandmother always said you had something special." "She was the only one who told me to keep going," I said quietly. Every time I wanted to quit, I held that brush until the shaking stopped. It reminded me who I was. For a moment, none of us spoke. The only sound was the distant echo of footsteps in the gallery. Finally, my mother exhaled. "I want to understand you, Lila. I want to know this part of you I tried so hard to ignore." I felt a lump rise in my throat, but this time, it wasn't from pain. "Then show up," I said simply. "Even when it's inconvenient. Even when you don't understand. Just show up." She nodded, and for the first time in years, I believed her. As they left, I stayed behind, standing alone in the quiet gallery. The lights cast long shadows on the floor, and for a moment, I imagined my younger self standing beside me, tired, hungry, terrified, but smiling. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the real paintbrush, the one that had survived every move, every late night, every triumph. I held it against my heart and whispered, "We did it." Then I turned toward the largest canvas, the one that had drawn gasps all night, and let a slow, fierce smile spread across my face. "They ignored my art," I said under my breath, the words tasting like victory, "but now it hangs in museums. And so do I."